Stop.
That. There we go. So I've just started the recording. I won't go back over everything for the recording because it appears the same of every meeting. So let me tell you a little bit about Argo workflows and events. So Argo workflow and events are 2 of 4 products in the Argo community that focus on cloud native, and everything in Argo is cloud native, and that means Kubernetes, focuses on essentially scheduling and executing workflows. And the tools are particularly popular inside the machine learning and data processing community. And we also see kind of CI and CD use cases, as well as things like performance testing, which we talked about in a previous meeting. In this meeting, I'm really pleased that we've got Eric Meadows and Peter Solanki. They're going to be doing some demos showing the stuff that they've been working on. And that's going to be really interesting because we love to see what people have been doing with Argo workflows. It kind of really validates us. And we'll also have Bala, who's one of the core team members, doing a demo of a new feature coming in V210 or maybe V2, is it V2? I think it's V210. In fact, I think it's been merged already, around semaphores, which is a useful feature if you've got large workflows that use limited or shared resources. And then there's a couple of discussion topics where I want to get, solicit feedback from people, or request for comment on the introduction of a webhook capability into the Argo server, as well as a slightly smaller discussion around the potential of building out a template catalog, potentially similar to Tecton CD, or they have a catalog, or to Airflow operators, or to the GitHub Actions catalog. Okay, so if you want to ask any questions, you can obviously put your hand up or just ask out loud when there's an appropriate point in the conversation. Or if you prefer, you can drop a message into the Zoom chat, and I'll monitor that and hopefully read back any messages that have been asked, and then we can put those to people. And we will also be recording this, and we typically publish the recording on YouTube afterwards if you want to review any particular sections, or if you want to share it with anybody that you're, or just of personal interest. And we get quite a number of viewers on YouTube as well, which I'm always very pleased by. Okay, so the first topic for today is going to be Eric Meadows, and he's going to be talking about CI/CD. Eric, are you ready for this?
Sure am. So
cool.
I'll share my screen when you're ready to go.
Crack on.
Cool. So, whoops. So I'm going to go through CI/CD for machine learning and MLB. Quick background about myself. I joined Major League Baseball back in January of this year. I've been doing machine learning and data engineering over the past, like 10 years. And MLB has just been great. We use, at MLB, quick background, we use the Google Cloud Platform. And our team, I'm on the machine learning data engineering team, we particularly use their Kubernetes engine, Cloud SQL, memory storage, and cloud storage. So real quick, just what were our CI/CD goals? Because we were looking at tools. We were migrating off of Amazon over to Google, and we said maybe Kubernetes might be a good build engine. We wanted to focus on automating our Docker builds, our unit testing, and our deployments. We wanted those deployments to be one-click rollbacks. We wanted continuous deployment for non-production deployments, and we wanted approval for when we deployed to actual production. We wanted to be able to handle all devs doing multiple builds and the ability to deploy anything, so pods, deployments, or Cloud Run, and others. And so we looked at Jenkins, we looked at Jenkins X, Google Cloud Build, Argo Workflows, and GoCD. And the one hit on Argo was that it was blank slate automation, so we had to build a lot ourselves, which now that we're talking about the hub, hopefully that all the work that we've done and other people have done will help make this real easy, especially in the data processing and CI/CD side. So these were what we presented internally. It was blank slate automation. Intuit dog foods it. It was used for Kubeflow, for data processing, and we can reuse the interfaces. Those were huge wins. And so that ended up winning out. And we have these workflow processes that we follow. So we have kind of I have 3 slides on this. So this is basically what our devs work in, is they just make a commit to the repo. We use a webhook that gets received by Argo events, and we report our build status to GitHub. We see if a link commit exists, then we clone, and then we discover what Docker builds need to happen within that repo, because we're more of a mono repo based in the ML team here. We build everything and then we report back. And when we build the repos for our models, ends up triggering a commit over to a models deployments repo, which handles all of our overlays for Kubernetes for the application configs. And it handles the same workflow. The difference that we have is that we link our commit. We have a commit message that actually has the URL, and that URL links back to the other Git status. So we can have workflows that depend on each other that are linked in terms of statuses, and we just do that via a commit message. And then future plans with us, we're talking about doing shadow deployments and doing canary deployments with gradual increases based upon metrics. So that's kind of us as a general. And then I was going to go through a quick demo and show you what some of these workflows look like. And so this is going to be our huge NPD build. So our NPD, I'm going to zoom in with the handy 2.9 zooming, is that we basically do a full build of all of our changes that happen with our Docker files. And we do an NPD, which is everything this side and over, and a prod build. And then because we have that notion of the deployments being a separate, so our CI process is here, our CD process is another workflow that I can show. I did not link this up. But this basically goes in and we'll go down and we will do our deployments and apply them separately. So if I go back to this, every one of our Docker builds, we decide between one of our Docker builders, and then we basically go down through a preset path on, we build our images, we test, then we render out our deployments. And then at the end, we end up just doing, as most people would, reporting our status out. And we have this, because we're making a commit to another repo, sometimes things collide. So sometimes we have the notion of failures, so we do retries when we do make those commits or merges to those other branches. And then real quick, the other part that's our large workflow. Our small workflow here is we do our auto discovery on what needs to be built. This is one dev branch. We see that we need to build 2 Docker images. We run our unit tests. And then we have different application configs that can happen all in this repo. And so we discover what we need to render out from an application side. We make those commits, and then we end up reporting out our status. And then these auto merges and commits trigger other builds. And so hopefully these will be into the, a good portion of this will be over in the hub templates. So any questions?
What workflow features do you leverage or rely on a lot that you find like useful?
As as far as features, we're really just using, I mean, I guess specify that more. We're using it as like blank slate. We're like, hey, like I can kick off this step and this next step with a Docker script, with a script and a Docker file.
Okay. And I think you mentioned you're going to contribute to the hub. So I guess you are leveraging like templates.
Yeah, we're leveraging templates a lot. So we have 6 major templates that are used across the org outside of ML. And we have a lot of our build processes are internal. We have those templates as well.
And when you use the templates, are you using them more as a component, or do you use templates as kind of like a predefined workflow?
So we do both. So
Okay.
we kind of split out. We have individual pieces that are like, hey, I want to build a Docker file, but then we have a larger set, which is like, hey, I'm going to discover my Docker files and build those. And some are like, I'm going to report out like in the bottom here, like our Git status. That's just a common shared one. But in a larger workflow template, we include that. So.
Cool. Okay. Oh, and then sorry, last question.
Yep.
For the shadowing and canarying, is that Argo rollouts or something different?
So we're focused on using Istio for the traffic routing with the shadow and the canary on that.
Okay.
We looked
I have a question. Do you see a need to deploy to multiple clusters? Because right now, from Argo workflows, are you deploying to single cluster or multiple?
We're deploying to a single cluster right now. We do have another team that is doing the multiple cluster, and that is to do org-wide.
Okay.
I have a question. It seems like you built the full CI and the CD portion of it. I'm just curious, why did you build the CD portion in Argo workflows versus using Argo CD for the CD?
So for us, we looked into Argo CD, and our org does use Argo CD across the board. It was just a choice to have it all in one spot. There's no real rhyme or reason behind it. We were doing it in Jenkins before in one tool, so we wanted to keep it in one tool.
I see. And just one more follow-up questions. When are you looking to contribute these templates into the hub?
Hopefully within this week. We have to get ready for opening day, so I'm doing it as best as I can while managing my other work.
Thank you.
There's a question from Derek, Alex, on the chat.
Yes. So we've got a couple of questions, Eric, in the chat. One from Matt C. Does Eric work at MLB Advanced Media out of curiosity? That's the first question.
MLB AM, we joined back in with Major League Baseball under the One Baseball initiative. So that join or reabsorption kind of happened over the last year to 3 years.
Okay. And Derek is asking, and I'm really interested in this question as well, how are the workflows triggered from your GitHub webhook? Are you using Argo events, I'm assuming?
Yeah, so we use Argo events to handle that, which encompasses our workflow, but we use the webhook version, not the GitHub version of it. The GitHub version, we wanted to be able to do an org-wide URL, and so that's why we don't use the GitHub version. We just use the webhook version.
Okay, that's interesting. Simon's asking probably what I'm sure is the most important question, definitely the question I wanted to ask. So it says, what's your team? Who's your team?
So I'm under baseball data, and I'm in the machine learning team underneath baseball data. So we handle a lot of different projects, and they're really exciting.
I think maybe you knew the actual question I wanted. Which baseball team do you support?
Oh, sorry. Cincinnati Reds.
Cincinnati Reds. Simon, who do you support, Simon?
Well, normally I would say the San Diego Padres, but
Of course.
that's not usually a very positive return choice. So right now the Giants.
Cool. I'm a Giants supporter, so we're playing the Padres in a couple of weeks, I think.
And then
okay,
so the last part I can answer that is that we are using Kubeflow pipelines right now. We are in the process of evaluating migrating off of that and just using Argo workflows.
Do you what are the differences? What are the I guess you and Peter both got some interest here. What are you looking at in that exercise?
What I'm looking for is ease of use. We did have an engineer or an intern, and he had made a lot of decent abstractions to the Kubeflow pipeline construction process of a pipeline. The problem that I find is that it is kind of more challenging to work with versus looking at Argo workflows and you know exactly what gets passed and what you can use in between steps. When it's assembled in the pipelines version, you don't know if you can necessarily pass in a variable because of the way it's defined. It doesn't follow typical Python design.
Okay, interesting. We're always quite interested in people who are using kind of other products kind of collaboratively with Argo workflows and Argo events. If you are using them, we do like to know about it. It's not the first time I think we've heard people moving for simplicity, particularly from people moving off Airflow, I think.
Yeah, and we'll look at whether we keep Airflow in the process or if we go all in on the workflow side. It's my next part of my sprint.
Okay, brilliant.
So Argo Workflows doesn't have a lot of CI/CD specific features. So if you are using it for those use cases, we would be really happy if you can contribute anything.
Yeah, and that's where I pinged Alex and I was like, I think maybe the hub, which would be good, would help with this. And so that's why we're hoping to contribute a lot of these pieces back.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric. So that was great. I hope you can share your slides with us in case people want to see them again in the future. Next up, we've got Peter Solanki. He's going to be talking a bit about managing Argo, and I'm hoping to see a really cool demo doing some 3D rendering that he's promised. Peter, are you ready?
Yes, can you guys see my screen and hear me?
Yes, and yes.
Perfect. Yes, we're going to talk a bit about managing Argo as a managed service, and we're going to talk about two use cases. One is a CGI rendering use case, one is a molecular dynamics use case. But first, see, who are we? So we are probably a bit of a different user of Argo than most people on this call. We are a startup public cloud, which is pretty rare these days. So we kind of try to compete with Amazon and Google, Azure. Our focus is on accelerated compute and other use cases that take a lot of compute. So GPUs is kind of what we built our business around. And with that, we tend to serve large sort of batch style customers. So this is people in the rendering space, molecular dynamics, neural net training, those type of people. And we also have sort of the other business segment is real-time type customers. So this is video transcoding and neural net inference, where we do quite a lot of work with the Kubeflow guys on the serving piece to sort of serve neural nets of CPUs. Our clients usually take quite a lot of resources. So on the GPU side, which is our focus, they take anywhere between 4,000 GPUs on and off, or in the CPU side, it's 2,000 plus cores. So we don't really deal with people who want to come in and kind of host their WordPress blog. That's not the focus of our company. And we don't do fancy managed databases and so on. People tend to host sort of their control plane on AWS and Google, and then they come to us when they need a lot of compute. The way we built our stack is large multi-tenant Kubernetes clusters running on bare metal. And this allows us to do some pretty cool things with really fast spin up and spin down times. We can move nodes around between clusters. We can run clusters to span multiple data centers, and we can do that pretty flexibly to kind of meet customers' needs. And how do we get into Argo? So when we started this business only 2 years ago, we started out by acquiring a CGI rendering product. So a sort of user-end platform to do CGI rendering. There we then built an in-house job scheduler to schedule these render jobs over all of our GPU nodes. It works fine. It actually worked surprisingly well. The guy who built it, Brian, is also on this call and is going to do our demo later on. But we quickly realized that we don't really want to be in the business of maintaining a job scheduler. You know, we needed more and more features. We wanted to move to something that was Kubernetes native. And we just didn't want to sort of reinvent the wheel. I felt like there should be products out for this. So we looked into a number of products. We looked into Peloton by Uber, and they kind of fell on just lack of community support. I don't know if anyone is actually using it outside of Uber. Seems really cool, but there just wasn't a lot of documentation on it, and didn't really want to head down that path. We looked at some CGI specific tools like OpenQ from Sony. And also didn't really like that, both lack of actual users outside of sort of Sony and Google, and just wasn't Kubernetes native and so on. And then we kind of stumbled upon Argo workflows and Argo CD last October, and it pretty quickly dawned on us that this is going to be the winner and going to help us with a lot of things. Both because Kubernetes native and the flexibility of Argo workflows kind of fit our vast needs of scheduling stuff on all different type of nodes and whatnot we need to do, and different chained workflows. So our journey then started sort of rebuilding our internal CGI rendering product right before Christmas, and then at the same time we got some clients who were moving off of Amazon and Google, who had different use cases, which we were going to get into, and they needed ways to batch process workflows. And since we already knew about Argo, then we kind of introduced them to, hey, you guys should check out Argo. I think this will be a great alternative to what you're doing today. And that kind of worked out. It helped us a lot, making us able to support these clients, and they ended up liking Argo as well. So then we kind of started building out kind of a managed Argo service where we manage the Argo control plane, and the client can submit their jobs. So now we have, I think, 5 sort of managed clients running on Argo, plus our own internal rendering software that we're going to demo later. What we are building now, or starting to design at least, is sort of simplified UI to Argo to be able to schedule sort of one-off pods or one-off workflows where you just input a Docker image and you don't even have to write a workflow YAML. And we're hoping to be able to contribute back more of the work that we're going to do to core Argo as well. We'll get back to that a bit later as well. So the first case study is a molecular dynamics client. So these guys, they run protein simulations. They're trying to find protein targets for drug development for all different types of diseases. They used to run on AWS using AWS Batch. And we moved them over using Argo. That was actually pretty smooth. And they had a pretty massive reduction in cost. And also thanks to both sort of Kubernetes Argo and how we build our bare metal stack, they can spin up 4,000 GPUs in 10 seconds, which is pretty awesome. The client runs a lot of workflows, but the workflows in themselves are very simple. They're actually just 1 or 2 steps, but they churn through easily 10,000 workflows in a day, with each workflow being 2 minutes to an hour each. And we saw some very interesting sort of artifacts when putting that much load, both on Kubernetes and on Argo. And Argo UI definitely doesn't like more than 1,000 workflows on sort of the top level view. And we also found some interesting memory leaks and metrics issues when churning through that many workflows. And yeah, in Kubernetes, if you don't clean up your pods, if you don't set your pod GC, then your etcd is going to be pretty unhappy when you start getting 10,000 pods in a namespace. So moving off AWS batch. So this client was using AWS batch. They were not doing anything fancy, but they thought that AWS batch was a very simple tool to work with. The functionality of AWS batch is way more limited than Argo. It's basically, you set up a container and then you just get an API for it, and then you input some JSON or something like that, and it will spin up these EC2 instances that run your container. We replaced this with Argo REST API that we manage. We manage Argo installation for them, and then they get the REST API and the Argo UI. They very quickly said, came to that, okay, we're testing this. We want to be able to submit the workflow template with some parameters through the Argo UI, and doing that is kind of clunky. And you have to end up typing YAML. So for someone who's hasn't worked with YAML before, some sort of scientist or something like that, you can't just jump into the Argo UI and submit the workflow template. Another feature gap is that the AWS batch makes it very easy to sort of aggregate and watch your logs through AWS Cloud Logs, whatever it's called. And especially when you're quickly sort of churning through your workflows and we're deleting pods, sort of managing and searching through logs is not easy using the Argo tools. So we built something quickly, just exposing all the logs we collect in Elasticsearch, built a quick Grafana dashboard, and then used the awesome link feature in Argo to, on the workflows, just link out to an external Grafana dashboard where they can search and look for all their logs. And as I mentioned earlier, the kind of the biggest pain points is that these guys want a UI to monitor their workflows, and when you have 1,000+ workflows running at the same time, the Argo UI sort of workflow list just kind of grinds to a halt. That's something that we would definitely want to help out with and contribute to sort of optimize that, but we haven't had a possibility to do it yet. All in all, the migration was not a big deal. Kind of both seen from us and the client's perspective. It was up and running in, I think, 2 weeks, and then a month of testing on that, and they were completely off AWS. And now that they've sort of realized the power of Argo, they're building more and more complex workflows. So I'm going to talk a bit more about our experience running Argo as a managed service. So we deploy one Argo installation per tenant, per customer. This is the reason we went with this is because we don't want to force everyone to be on the same version. We want to be able to have different upgrade paths, and also to ensure sort of separation between clients. This is something that might change in the future, but right now we're pretty happy with it. The Argo's simplicity in design, meaning that you don't necessarily need a bunch of databases and a bunch of different components that talk to each other, makes it very easy to deploy it in different namespaces without a lot of overhead. We manage our upgrades via Argo CD, of course. By default, we use the K8s API executor, which we have been moderately happy with. So when you have a lot of workflows, the performance suffers, and there are some issues which I believe have been fixed in recent pull requests, where if you have a long-running workflow and executor's connection to the API server drops, or there's an etcd leader change or anything like that, basically the workflow fails. The executor fails the workflow, which is not very good. So for some of these more trusted, high sort of performance need clients, we run them on a Docker executor, which has some safety concerns, but we solve that in other ways. We spent a lot of time digging through GitHub issues, because a lot of the issues that we run into with Argo are already someone found or solved. We're really happy with the release cadence. The maintainers with Alex and Simon have been super helpful. Whenever we stumble upon an issue, either it's already identified or we identify it and it gets fixed really quickly. So even though we run into some issues with all different type of stuff over the past couple of months, they tend to be fixed really quickly, which kind of makes working with Argo a breeze, and we don't have to spend a lot of time kind of hacking around things for our clients. something we definitely should have had and are trying to get is more in-house Go talent to be able to both fix bugs ourselves and contribute a bit to the Argo projects with things that are helpful for people like us. We are hiring. If you know any Go developers on the sort of US East Coast that are looking for a job, please send them our way. So I'm going to jump into the second and last case study. So this is our own CGI rendering product called Concierge Render. So this is a cloud render product built for 3D designers and studios. It's a web app that you'll see in a second. You upload your 3D models and you click render, and we then federate it out and render it over hundreds to thousands of GPUs. We package up all the rendering software in Docker containers, and then we use Argo to sort of orchestrate the render workflow to select if it needs to be rendered on a CPU, GPU node, and so on. Our web app backend integrates with Argo over the Kubernetes API. The reason we went this way instead of the Argo REST server is that we need some functionality that Argo REST doesn't provide. Like we need to be able to watch workflows, to track state changes and update the UI. And since you can't do that via REST, we decided to, instead of having sort of a hybrid approach, we're just going to do everything over the Kubernetes API. We also write some special code to update workflow templates in Argo via CI/CD, where we, the workflow template is named something regular like render.yaml in the Git repo, but then once they're run through CD, they get renamed to render-their MD5 sum. And then we have something that when we submit workflows, we replace all the references, to render with render-MD5 sum. And this allows us to have multiple versions of workflow templates deployed at the same time in the same namespace. So you can have, when you can release it, that type of stuff with changes in workflow templates, and they still don't overwrite each other. I'm going to give you a quick demo of, or actually Brian, who's on the call, is going to give you a quick demo of the product and how it looks in Argo when we spin up a render. Brian, I'm going to let you take over screen share.
Brian, are you muted?
Yeah, I think you're muted, Brian.
Hey guys, sorry about that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so first I'm going to start with just an example of what we're going to be doing here. This window here has a version of Blender open that has the scene that we're going to transform from kind of this rough wireframe, untextured image into a 145 frame scene. Blender is an open source product that's used by everyone from kind of small hobbyists that are just getting started to Hollywood type studios. Our application was built to support kind of the entire range of those users. There's a lot of complexity in the background that kind of teases out things that may or may not be wrong with files and handles them separately. But today we're going to do something pretty simple just to show the scale and the execution of Argo and how awesome it's been for us. So we'll log in here to our application, and we're going to take our classroom file and we're going to spin it up. It's now been launched. Now we're going to go over to Argo and let's see. We'll see here that it's going to the workflow is going to execute what's called a slice step, which will take it and say, okay, how many nodes is this specific user able to render on? It'll split up the frame range based upon the number of nodes they're allowed and send that out and dispatch that out to GPU nodes. So this render here will use just over 100 Tesla V100s to get this done. The user can see in real time as frames come in. But for us, this has been really a game changer in the way that we were managing workflows. Just having the flexibility to have the step functions in place to say, okay, if something goes wrong here, we're going to do retries in a different way than we did last time. The retry functionality for a render farm is hugely important because we receive a lot of scenes from clients that have very, very different hardware requirements. So we may get something from somebody that takes 2 seconds to render. We may get something from somebody that takes 20 hours per frame to render. So in a couple seconds here, we'll start seeing the first pieces of these come in. And scroll down to some logs real quick. And so it's so awesome that we can kind of go right into the Argo UI and see the logs in real time. Makes it really easy for us on the administration side to see what's happening to make sure jobs are running okay. So we've got our first 28 frames. And we've turned that wireframe image into this photorealistic rendering. So the product is been super awesome for us. It's great that we can kind of push renders out to thousands of GPUs if we need. And we've actually had a couple studio clients that have come in that have begun using the Concierge platform and said, hey, is there any way I can get access to this directly myself? So we've onboarded a few studios that are using Argo directly that have brought it into their own CI/CD pipeline. And they like it because they can get access to more GPUs and they have more flexibility. And we actually have some folks that their own programmatic execution. So we're extremely happy with it. We just went live with this new upgrade a couple weeks ago. But so far it's leaps and bounds better than what we had before.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. So I'm gonna just want to tie in because you asked Michael that earlier what features we use in Argo. So a lot of our workflows use retries, as Brian mentioned. Retries are very, very good for us. We are developing some stuff in-house to do retries with increased hardware requirements. So say that we have something that fails on a node with not a so powerful GPU or less system resources. We want to, for every retry step, sort of increase and like a pod spec patch with what resources this step requires. But just out of the box retries with backoffs have been super helpful for both of our use cases. We leverage workflow templates quite a bit, where we try to just make the workflows less complex by leveraging workflow templates and split them up into main workflows and then one workflow template per render engine and so on. We use artifacts, both HTTP and raw artifacts, to inject some Python scripts and stuff that we need inside the render component, the render container, and that allows us to kind of version these Python scripts with our main source code, and then just inject them via Argo artifacts into the container at workflow schedule time. So we don't need to rebuild sort of our containers that are actually our containers with the render software every time we want to update sort of our Python scripts that run inside the container, if that makes sense. And yeah, I think that's it. This was my last slide. So I'm opening up to any questions for anyone.
Hey, Peter, you mentioned that moving from AWS Batch to Kubernetes, you were able to get a big cost savings. Where did most of those savings come from? So
yeah, I mean, most of those savings come from just moving from AWS to CoreWeave, where we offer a lot of wide different range of GPUs. Where AWS, you really have the K80 and you have the V100, and we have a lot of GPUs in between. And for a lot of use cases, the K80 is very underpowered, or the V100 is super overpowered. So for a lot of use cases, just find a better fit. We also just tend to be cheaper than Amazon in general on sort of hour by hour pricing. So that's one piece of it. The second piece of it is that since we just spin up containers on a multi-tenant Kubernetes cluster, there's very little dead time. Versus if you do something with EC2, you're going to spin up an EC2 instance and then you have to join it into your AKS cluster. There's a lot of dead time when you spin up and down. And we see that as well on other use cases that are more time sensitive, where if the spin up time is only 10, 20 seconds, they can be much more fine-tuned in the spin up and spin down, versus if the spin up time is 5 to 7 minutes because you have to spin up a VM and then join it into a Kubernetes cluster, you're going to just keep more nodes in your Kubernetes cluster, which is going to cost you more money.
Right. Well, that's great. Also, you mentioned that one of the pain points was kind of the scalability of the GUI. What's your thought in terms of like a table-based GUI for really large workflows versus having making the GUI, the graphical one, more scalable?
Yeah, I think that, but table-based, but still on the web UI, but pagination, or what do you mean by that?
Basically, instead of trying to show a graphical graph, it would be more like with tables with sorting, filtering, pagination.
Okay, yeah. So for our use cases, we don't have the problem inside the single workflow. Our workflows are much simpler than what we saw from MLB, individual workflows. The problem is that we push so many different workflows through. So as the summary list is where Argo chokes. So in the individual workflow views, we never have any problems because they're not that crazy yet. But the big problem is that when you just want to list the workflows, and we have 1,000+ workflows in that list, it just gets bogged down because I think the Argo server is just sending every workflow with all their details to the React front end. Doesn't implement any pagination. I think that's why it gets slowed down.
I see. Well,
I think that's
fantastic demo. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for listening.
What kind of scalability problems? I know it seems like you shard the controller into so many controllers per or one namespace, one controller.
Yeah, exactly, and a namespace mapped to a client for us.
Okay.
So we had some scalability problems. I filed some tickets around that. We had some memory leaks that were pretty interesting, and we had some early on stuff that you guys helped with very quickly. Otherwise, the scalability problems have been in the UI, where the UI gets bogged down. That's like 90% of the pain point has been like, oh great, the Argo UI doesn't load again because now we have too many namespaces, and people get annoyed, and then you yell at them and tell them use the CLI, stop relying on the UI, and they're like, well, the UI is pretty, and yeah. So that's really where the pain points are. Otherwise, we haven't. Otherwise, there's been very little. As I said, we had. Before we implemented any reasonable workflow TTLs, just deleting, 10,000 workflows with Argo delete -- all takes like an hour. So that's pretty interesting. But except for those type of things, we haven't really had any issues with scalability that aren't, also a problem with the rest of the Kubernetes stack. As I said, when you have 10,000 pods in a namespace, Kubernetes is not going to be super happy with you. etcd is not going to be super happy. So my tip is really, be aggressive with TTLs on your workflows when you have a lot of them, and pod GC. And the downside of that is that, you obviously lose being able to dig into the workflow using Argo Get, Argo List, or the UI. So you need to kind of offload your logs to somewhere else like Elasticsearch and so on, because the pod is gone. Yeah, it could possibly be an avenue to do some better, like more direct integrations with Elasticsearch maybe, or those type of databases for logs. So you can still click the logs button in the UI and it fetches logs from somewhere else. I know there either is support or has been talking about support saving logs as artifacts, which is something that could be interesting. We haven't looked into it because we have Elasticsearch collecting logs for us. We don't archive workflows when they're complete. So we haven't deployed, any of the database support in Argo with Postgres, mostly because we haven't wanted to add that level of complexity. That's probably something that we will want to do at some point, but there's been so much other things to sort of manage and maintain that adding the complexity of sort of an archive database and managing that is not something I've been ready to add yet. So we kind of been dealing with trying to collect all the data we need from the workflow and then just having it expire using TTL. Okay, well, if it says painless, I'm probably going to end up doing it, and then I'll let you know how it scales.
I have a question, Peter. How do you secure your various user interfaces? You mentioned it was multi-tenant.
Yes, so that's why also one of the reasons we run Argo per namespace. So we run a soft multi-tenancy Kubernetes clusters. So, but each namespace is pretty strictly, separated from each other, both through network firewall policies and all the pod security policies and so on. So since each customer has their own Argo installation, there is no sort of multi-tenancy on the Argo level. And we, then the UI themselves, we either put it behind an ingress where we put authentication, or they are just not publicly accessible and they have to do post forward and port forward and so on.
Okay, so you use the same authentication you use for your own web app you've written?
No, we don't. It would be an ingress, and it would be some simple authentication like basic auth for that specific user. We haven't built sort of a unified authentication thing for all of our sort of Kubernetes services. That's something that's coming. But it's pretty simple. Yeah, but it's either or. Sometimes we even use sometimes we even use the Argo UI off with Kubernetes client credentials. Sometimes users do that as well.
Okay. Peter, I have a quick question.
Yep.
You mentioned that you part of the things you're working on right now is to be able to scale retries with more resources using pod spec merge.
Yeah.
I was wondering, how do you parameterize that?
So it's a bit too early. So what we have right now is kind of, we have it hacked up in the workflow where we just have a bunch of kind of if else type of statements in the workflow. But we want to do something more generic and something that we could contribute back. But I don't have a design for that yet. And that's something that I would bring to you and discuss with you before we actually start coding on it. Before we can actually implement something in Argo itself, I need to have a Go developer to work on it. So that's kind of the type of stuff that will happen after I make that hire and find someone who's super excited about contributing to Argo to work for us.
Yeah, this is actually the second time I've heard the use case where retry needs some variance between the attempts. Like I think the other use case I heard was they need to keep increasing memory. Or
yeah, exactly. I saw that issue, and I think that the issue got close, or at least it hasn't moved. And I think that there definitely needs to be a good amount of thought put into that, so you don't make something that's pseudo restrictive and only only solves one use case, and you also don't want to make it like too random either.
Yeah,
something that's been on my mind is to be able to evaluate expressions using the Argo variable syntax.
Yeah,
because we expose we now expose what number of retry that you're in as an Argo variable. So if you could just simply do some expression resolution with it into the pod spec merge, would that be helpful?
It would, but in our case, we might want to retry it on a node or a different node selector.
I see.
So you might want to change a node selector from Tesla P6000 GPU and change it to a Tesla V100 GPU, and then it's not only arithmetic. So so then you kind of want to use that almost in like a when condition, and run this when retry is 2, and then figure out how to do that without a bunch of duplication.
Yeah. One workaround I've suggested for this limitation is to actually not use the retry, but use like some loop that iterates the variance that you need, and then when it actually succeeds, you actually skip the remaining stuff, because that's kind of like a cheesy way to do a retry with variance.
Yeah, I get it. That makes sense. Definitely look into that as well. As sort of a workaround, it would still be really nice if we can come up with something that's more sort of Argo native.
Thank you. That was really interesting.
There was a question about the etcd issue. I don't think I've actually filed an issue for it, but I think there's a very recent issue or pull request. I'm going to pull that up and send it into the chat.
Are you able to share the slides with people? Or?
Yeah, I'm happy to share the slides. How do you want me to share them?
Just send them to me. I'll add them to the documents.
Okay, perfect. Any questions? I'm on Slack, Peter Solanki. Hit me up. If you need a lot of GPUs for something, also hit me up there.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. I mean, it's a fantastic demo from both you and from Brian and from Eric today. We just really love hearing about how people are using Argo workflows and the different use cases people are solving. That was really helpful for us to kind of determine what our plan is in terms of new features and capabilities that we want to build into. So if anybody else wants to volunteer, it's also a really great opportunity to talk about what you and your business are doing as well. And I've got a few more lined up over the next couple of months as well. I'm quite excited about. I won't tell you too much about that just yet, but it's going to be pretty good, I think. Okay, so next on the agenda, we are obviously currently working on features for version 2.10, and that should go release candidate in this week, so probably Friday, or maybe it won't make it until Monday. And there's a couple of new features in there. One is called memoization. But today I've got Bala, and Bala is going to be giving us a demo of a feature called Semaphore. So Bala, please take it away.
Yep, thanks Alex. Hi, I'm Bala. I'm staff engineer in Intuit, working in the Argo workflow project. Let me share my screen. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So we were working on the feature called Semaphore. Now it's renamed to synchronization. So basically, like, the current Argo is supporting the rate limited in the two scenarios. One is like a configuration level, which is a controller level, so that it will control the parallel of workflow execution. The another one is like a step level and task level, which will control that rate limit the particular workflow level. So in the synchronization, it will solve that two main use cases. One is like the user can restrict certain workflows, not all workflows, and it will support that multiple rate limits. The user can configure the multiple rate limits, and which can refer in the certain types of workflows, which will be rate limited. Then another one is like you can rate limit the specific steps across the workflows. That are the two major use cases it's going to be solved. Let me demo that. I have a config map, which has a two keys. One is like workflow, it's a 1, and a template is 2. So I have workflow, which is referring the config map with a key for the synchronization. This is like a workflow level synchronization. So if the workflow object has this reference, it can run only one at a time. Let me submit that. I'm going to submit 2 times. So it will submit the 2 workflows. Then the second workflow will wait for the first workflow to finish, and it will start the second workflow. List. You can see that the second one was pending. And it will wait for if I'm submitting the next one, the hello world, which will automatically execute it in the parallel. Oh, I think I'm late. Okay, if you want to demo once again, I'm submitting 2 again and 1 again. If you see that hello world and synchronization is running parallelly, but the same synchronization, second one is waiting for the first one to finish. So in this case, if you have like a certain class of workflows, you need to rate limit it. You can use the synchronization to rate limit the certain workflows. Then rest of workflows will be executed parallel. The second demo I have is like a template level workflows. So template level is the same spec element, which is called synchronization and semaphore with your key. So one beauty of this feature is this template lock will be across the workflows. If the two workflows have the same semaphore lock on the particular template, then it will be rate limited across the workflows. So for that one, let me submit that. So I have two windows to submit that so that you can see that. One. Oh, sorry. That's my typo. Clear. You can see that first template is first workflow is executing the 2 at a time, and the rest of the nodes are waiting for the lock to get released from the previous one. And here the same template is using, but it's waiting for the lock from the previous workflow. And the locks are basically ordered by the priority also. So suppose if the second workflow has a higher priority, then the second workflow will take the priority to get the locks and execute it first. Yep. So the both workflows are completed with the based on the configuration we have. Yep. That's it from me. Do you guys have any question?
Bala, could you tell us about the kind of use cases you would solve?
So the mainly we have a use case saying that we don't want to rate limit all the workflows, but we need to rate limit certain workflows. Basically, in the Intuit, we have like a data ingestion team. They want to rate limit only the particular table data ingestion workflows. The workflows are triggered from the Argo event, and they don't want to overwrite each other if it is running in the parallel. So they want to rate limit the workflows based on the table names.
It's another way to state it is it's like having a priority queue that is determined by a semaphore. And so one of the design decisions is that when notifying a waiter or choosing a waiter to notify, to wake up, to acquire the semaphore, we choose the one that has the highest priority and the earliest creation timestamp. And so so it's a combination of synchronization features along with prioritization.
I know I asked it in the chat, but this seems like you could achieve the depends on past functionality of Airflow then by using the semaphore and spinning, if you're trying to do a backfill and spinning off multiple workflows.
I don't know that feature. Does anybody else know of it?
Depends on past. You can set it to true in Airflow. And what that means is that if you do kick off a backfill, it waits for a previous run to complete. And so if you scheduled like a job every minute and you scheduled it for yesterday, it would kick off, 86,000 or not 86,000, whatever the number is, minutes worth of jobs. And then once one completes, the next one follows.
Yeah, technically, yeah, that you can achieve using this one. Basically, it will prioritize based on the creation time.
Yep.
Yep, thanks. That's a good use case. Yep.
So
yeah, that's it from me, Alex.
Thank you,
guys.
thank you, Bala. So that is a new feature coming in version 2.10, and hopefully that'll be ready for you to try out on Monday next week if you want to give it a go. Okay, I'm going to now share my screen since I think the rest of the meeting is me talking, which is my favorite thing. And what I thought, I'd just initially give you a bit of an insight into how we go about determining what we work on next, what our roadmap will be. And it's actually relatively simple. So when you raise an issue in GitHub, you have an option to raise a bug report, enhancement proposal, or question. And we try and respond to all of these, within 24 hours typically. We tend to look at bug reports as higher priority than enhancement proposals, especially if you think they're a regression from a previous functionality. The way we then look at enhancements is we typically go into the list here, we sort them by the number of thumbs up. So if you've got an enhancement you would think is particularly important, or in fact a bug report that you think is particularly important, the one thing you can do to kind of bring that, get that prioritized is to give it a thumbs up. Now we don't always then directly go and implement the first item on the list. We sometimes will go down further in the list because there's a workaround for an item, or it's not necessarily something we want to do, or perhaps we hope that people from the community will do it, because it's quite hard for us to implement things such as for the core team to implement things such as support for Azure, for example, because we run our workloads on GKE and AWS, so we can't. It's very hard for us to test it. So if you've got something unusual like that, it's often a really good one to contribute to. And the reason I mention this is because we recently decided to work on, in version 2.11, the ability to trigger a workflow from a webhook. I'm going to give a little bit of an insight into how we are planning to go about doing that, with the goal of soliciting feedback from people on the meeting today so they can talk to us a bit about it. So the plan is to attempt to fill 1, 2, or 3 of these 3 use cases mentioned here. The first one we think is pretty clear cut, that people want to submit a workflow from a workflow template based on a message, or potentially a cluster workflow template. The second one is that we know that people use automation, and this is, events is very much about automation, to resume a suspended workflow. And the way that you do that today is you'd use the API or the CLI to do that, and some automation behind it. And the final one is what we want to do ourselves, which is basically gate a cron workflow. And gating cron workflow basically means you schedule a workflow, but then that workflow does not actually start executing until another precondition has occurred. So for example, you might want to schedule a workflow at 1 a.m. and then wait until an event comes in to indicate some data is ready. Now, we know that you can do some of this stuff through Argo events, and I'll talk a little bit about how this is likely to differ from Argo events. So if you want to have somebody send a webhook event, such as, for example, GitHub sending a webhook, then you need to secure that endpoint and create a token. And the way that we create tokens currently is basically you'll create a service account in your cluster for that token, and then you can make a HTTP request to one of 2 endpoints. They're actually the same endpoint. Is whether or not you include the namespace or exclude the namespace. The reason you'd include the namespace is because the service account that you use does not have cluster scoped permissions. And a bit of an overview for people, what does that mean? Effectively, you might be able to trigger a workflow based on a workflow template. You would need 2 permissions. You need the permission to get the workflow template and to create a new workflow. And that permission can be specified at a namespace or globally. And depending on how your account is set up, you would do that. That allows you to have 2 different URLs depending on what you want to do. Now, you'll get an OK response back, that from a 200 OK response, unless the queue is full. So we queue all events inside the system, and you'll get a 503 if that's the case. So typically you won't see a failure on sending the message, but you might see a failure in your logs as a result of that. What do we expect an event to contain? Well, an event is actually intended to contain just any JSON message, any JSON payload. And then whether or not an event is used to trigger a workflow template is based on a thing called an expression. Now, I think it might be better to include an example of a workflow template that can be triggered. I'll come back to the expressions. I'll explain the expression syntax based on the template, because I think maybe this document isn't ordered in the best and easiest to read order. So a workflow template that can be triggered based on an event simply has a new field in the spec called event, and there's a field called an expression. An expression is not the same as probably the curly brace syntax you might be used to for parameters. It is actually similar to the depends on syntax. And in fact, it's the same as the depends on syntax in that it's evaluated over an environment, and the environment is basically the message. So this expression here says that the event must have a message in its payload, so a field called message, and it must have a metadata of X Argo E2E, and that would be metadata basically means the same as a HTTP header. So you have to access to any HTTP headers to start with the X hyphen prefix, which would be things like X GitHub action or X GitLab action. What's not shown in this example is also you'd have access to the subject of the claim set, and that is intended to allow you to filter out events based on who sent them. So the idea is if you're accepting events from GitHub and from GitLab, I don't know who would do that, but let's just use those as kind of very canonical examples. You might not want to have a workflow triggered based on a GitLab message or a GitHub one. And you can use the claim set subject, kind of the user, kind of the claim set.subject is kind of the username of who it is. And that might be a bit longer than this because it's a service account. It might be, and let me see if I can get an example to show you, which is a little bit clearer. Just going to copy it from the proper example. Just pasting the URL. So a service account has a slightly different, different subject syntax, a system, colon service account, colon namespace, colon service account name. So that might be, for example, Jenkins is the one I tend to use. Okay. So does anybody have any questions about that so far? The events will come in, and this will result in potentially a workflow template being triggered. Eric, you're asking, is this a consolidation of events and workflows? Let me come back to that at the end of the discussion and tell you what the differences are between the two of those. Okay, and so here's an example of triggering that above event with the authorization token, and that would result in the workflow being triggered and printing out the workflow. The second thing we are considering doing, and this is a second priority, this probably wouldn't make the MVP, but might make a V2, is the ability to resume a suspended workflow. So currently a suspended workflow is one that contains a suspend node template, and that will suspend at that point when it gets to that particular node. And you can then resume that by either resuming it from the user interface by clicking on the resume button, or you can send a HTTP request using the CLI or so forth to execute a resume command. Both of those require the person sending the message to understand about Argo workflows and the format and syntax of Argo workflows. The events allows you to connect to clients who don't understand or don't know about workflows, but do know how to send webhook events. And so here's the syntax for a template. A suspend template is simply one that has the suspend node, and then it has an event which has an expression, which is very much the same thing. And this will execute and suspend at the point of that suspend node. We also would support a manual intervention and automatic resumption after timeout, because these are both features that suspend nodes already support. So you could do that from a CLI user. If your workflow goes into suspend state and for some reason you don't get the message that you want, or you have some kind of outage, that would allow you to do it. And then finally, this is just an example of gating a cron workflow. This one is the one where it starts at 1 AM. So we have a cron workflow schedule and a duration of 1 hour and an expression that basically evaluates status and other things. Okay, so does everybody have any questions about those before I talk a little bit about, is this a consolidation of Argo events and workflows? Silence. Okay. I know this meeting's gone on quite long, so maybe that's why. So just to talk about the consolidation of Argo events workflow, the answer to that is So we know that people often use Argo events and Argo workflows in concert, but we also know that Argo events is an additional software component you deploy, whose configuration is non-trivial. In fact, Derek Wang is currently working on it, making that easier to use. There isn't really a goal to merge this in the same way we don't really have the goal of the cron workflow was never to bring in that kind of calendar functionality from Argo events. This is intended to solve very simple use cases. So you know, this is not expected to support or understand anything more sophisticated than very basic webhooks. Does that answer your question, Eric?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so we've not had a lot of questions about this, so we will perhaps come back to this, you know, later on. If you want to provide feedback, that would be fantastic. You can just come on GitHub and there's a ticket for that already. Okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about a discussion we've had recently about producing a template catalog. So the Argo template feature has come into full force in kind of version 2.8 and version 2.9, and allows you to basically create templates. But we actually know that people have and want to share and want to use templates. The plan is to kind of see if there's a strong interest in this and find out what kind of templates people would like to do. We've had one submission by Daniel. So he's proposed an Argo CD template that allows you to sync an Argo CD server. But what kind of other templates are people interested in having? Okay, I'm going to take that as Terraform template. Christian, can you expand on what you'd like from Terraform?
Well, of course. Right now, we do use Concourse pipelines to run our Terraform, and we've been looking to move them into Argo workflows. And at the time, we do utilize workspaces. So in short, like if you have multiple workspaces and you want to filter, like apply these this Terraform using these workspaces concurrently.
Okay.
For example, that would be really nice.
So I think we're looking for what kind of things you're interested in, and more importantly, are people willing to submit and contribute their own templates to the catalog as well? Because that'll probably be the one thing that makes it a success, is, you know, a healthy ecosystem of catalogs. It's probably good to compare it to GitHub Actions, if I can spell GitHub Actions. So if you go into GitHub Actions, of course, they have you know, a really large catalog of different actions you can use, and the Tecton catalog, Tecton CD catalog, they've also got a really good selection of Tecton tasks you can import into your system as well. So it'd be really good to kind of have some similar things to those guys. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. So thank you all for coming along to today. So I hope you've enjoyed all the different demos and discussions that we've had today. We do this on every third Wednesday of the month. If you want to come and ask any more questions from people to do that, please drop into our Slack. And we've got a couple of people asking about the serverless workflows group Slack channel. So I've added that to the document if you want to find out where that is. Of course, I hope you all stay safe and have a great week.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you, guys.